Thank you very much for introduction. So I'm Reiji Suzuki from Nagoya University. Today I'd like to talk about this title. Okay, so Lenia is, as you know, Lenia is an extension of Game of Life based on continuous space, time, state, and generalized local rules. So important thing is that various lifelike patterns resembling microscopic life forms showing biological properties such as spatially localized organization and spontaneous movement. The important thing is that many interesting creatures were already discovered. So recently, Lenia has been extended to a framework for considering the adaptive behavior and evolution of organisms. For example, in sensory motor Lenia, that is based on the cultural learning of some kind of search algorithm to find interesting behavior. In this framework, the creatures were able to regenerate and preserve their structure, dealing with the obstacles or other creatures like this. And also in flow Lenia, this realized the mass conservation. So that means that the sum of the cellular automata's state value remains constant over time. This property enables the integration of the parameters of CA update rule within the dynamics of cell. Thank you. Thank you. This flow area brought about the genetic diversity of the update rules among creatures that can lead to intrinsic evolution of creature. So this color represents the genotype of each creature. So their genetic diversity. So, but this talk focuses on the not finding a new creatures, but try to analyze the already discovered Lenia creatures. So the purpose is to understand the ecological and evolutionary characteristics of discovered Lenia creatures. And we focus on the interactions between creatures and their environment. The method is to assume the growth of creatures based on the consumption of resources distributed over their environment. This is inspired by the question of what would happen if the Lenia creatures were grown in a petri dish with cultural media. So this talk explains the detail of the extension and also shows that the resource limit of each cell has a significant effect on the morphology and the behavior of creatures. So by the way, I found that these are the creatures we are looking at this talk. This creature looks like the logo of this conference. Oops. Okay, so let me introduce the state update rule of original Lenia briefly. So as you know, here is a world composed of a cell state A, and the convolution function K is applied to this 2D state value of all cells. And this result, this value determines the energy value over the cell. This is a generalization of the totalic sum in Game of Life. And then this value is used to growing the state values. So the growth rate of this cell state is determined by the growth function G and over U, energy value. But this is the simplest version, and we adopt the multi-channel and multi-layer versions of Lenia. So actually the 3 channels and multi-kernel version of Lenia we use in this talk. So let me introduce the extension. So firstly, we added a new channel that represents the local distribution of resources over the cell. This value can take 0 to Rmax. Rmax is a parameter that determines upper resource limit. This is a point of this study. So in addition to the state channel, in this case, the red, green, blue, each represents each 3 different state value. And in addition to this, we assume that this resource channel over this space. Then we assume that interactions among them. The first one is the consumption of the resource by creatures like this. So the resource decreases in proportional to the average of the state value over all channels like this. So in this case, you can see the dark rings around here. So this means that the existence of this creature consumed this resource. Okay, and we also assume that the recovery process of the resource. Then this is the effects of the resource on this to state value creatures. We assume that the growth of linear creatures depends on the current resource amount. There are two types of rules. One is a direct effects of the resource on the creatures. In this case, this is an equation of the state update rule. Here, this is a RD, this is a resource value. This means that the amount of the resource directly affect the amount of increase and decrease in the state value. So higher resource corresponds to the higher amount of the increase or decrease in the state value. Because this is directly multiplied, AT is directly multiplied by RT. Second one is the indirect effects. So in this case, the RT is here. So this is in the, so energy is multiplied by RT. So this is an indirect effects of resource value on this state value via growth function. I will explain how this difference affects the result. Then, we conducted some preliminary experiments and analysis by focusing on the two discovered species with 3 channels called emitter and aquarium. So emitter emits like the small glider like pattern, red one, like this, and shows some explosion of the zero morphology occupying the whole space due to the accidental collision. And aquarium has several modes of morphological and behavioral pattern like this. And we focus on how the Rmax upper limit value of resource can affect the behavior. So Rmax determines the abundance of resource. And actually, there are some coefficients for RG and RC. This determines the effects of the consumption and also the growth process. But this study, we picked up the some cases that show the interesting behavior. This is basically that effects of Rmax on the state value. The x-axis is Rmax, so the resource limit, and y-axis is average state value. And so as the blue symbol corresponds to the direct effects case, and the red corresponds to the indirect effects case. And this is a case of emitter and aquarium. So if you look at the blue symbols, as you see that this, as the Rmax increases, average state value simply increasing, monotonously increasing. This means that the direct effects of the resource on the creatures. So high amount of resource brings about a higher amount of state values. But in direct case, as you see, so red symbols, you can see some kind of peak of the average state value like this. This is indirect effects. And similar patterns were tendency were observed also in the aquarium case. Yeah. And detailed analysis found that there are 3 typical behavioral patterns: low, intermediate, and high resource limit case. I will explain in detail for each case. First one is a low upper limit source limit case. Around here, so it can take the smaller growth process compared with the original one. As you see, in this case, the number of creatures was smaller and their morphological structure was very simpler, so not so much emitting gliders. And so resource limit made them difficult to maintain original structure. And we found that interesting behavior that is a low resource avoidance behavior. So as you see that some creatures create a trajectory of low resources like this. And then they tended to change their direction to move when they came across the trajectory of low resources created by other creatures. So like this, so this kind of turn happened. This implies that the interactions between creatures and the environment can lead to evolution of creatures based on such adaptive behavior. The second one is the intermediate case. So if the Rmax upper resource limit is intermediate, we could see the dynamic and global interactions between creatures and environment. So it is a kind of prey-predator population dynamics. So creatures began to rapidly extend their morphology that is composed of a different type of the units from the original over the space. And then that will reduce the amount of resources that becomes darker. But this brings about shrinking of the creatures. Creatures dies out. But the survival of the few original emitters around them happens. So they recovers the population like this. So this kind of a prey predator-like behavior happened. And as maximum value of resource, Rmax increased, the timing during which the whole space was occupied by the creatures increased. And we observed some similar pattern with the indirect case, but the growing patterns were different. So in the case with a high resource limit, there are two types depending on the direct effect and the indirect effect of effects from environmental creature. In the case of the direct effects, like this, a whole space was quickly occupied by creatures. This is basically the similar mechanism to the intermediate case. So the higher amount of resource directly corresponds to the higher amount of creature state values, and no faster shrinking of their morphology. But as you see, changing patterns of resource distribution and accidental extinction of a few creatures made the whole structure keep moving through the trial. In the case with the indirect case, the behavior is quite different. We could see the high resource avoidance behavior. So as you see, a creature moved very slowly and got stuck within the hole of resources. So, brighter area is a high resource, and darker hole corresponds to the low resource area. And they went back and forth in their low resource area and went extinct if there was no place to move. So this is due to the similar effect of the overcrowding of living cell in the game of life. So the two large resource value greatly increase the energy of each cell, even if the state value was small. So this tended to make the growth rate small by exceeding the peak in the growth function. So local overcrowding happened, that make the decrease in the state value. So these creatures cannot get into the high resource area. Okay, we have conducted the similar experiment using an aquarium like this, and basically the not so clear, but similar effects of Rmax on creatures were observed. But in this case, more various morphology and behavioral pattern appear to have emerged. But we need to analyze in more detail. So in conclusion, we propose the extended version of Lenia in which interactions between creatures and their environment were incorporated. And we observed that the abundance of resources can substantially affect the emerging behavior of creatures. So low resource avoidance, global interactions, and explosion, high resource avoidance. And this is interesting because even without even without a change in the rule of the original Lenia creatures, future work is detailed analysis of the effects of parameters and much more focus on the evolution of morphology and behaviors. Thank you so much for kind attention.